when 33-year-old Tania Gomez moved from Stockholm, Sweden, to Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. Her new neighbors believed that she had relocated in search of a quieter lifestyle. They knew that she had run a successful dog rescue organization back in her home country, but were unaware that she was one of the continent's most wanted fugitives. Nicknamed the Cocaine Queen of Europe, Gomez spent 4 years living on the run from law enforcement. Since 2021, she had been wanted on drug trafficking and money laundering charges for allegedly smuggling large quantities of marijuana and cocaine into Sweden. Gomez had fled the country after being arrested in a major drug bust and was still at large in 2023 when she landed on Europol's 50 most wanted fugitives list. She was finally captured in February of 2025 after investigators tracked her to Lanzarote, where she appeared to be keeping a low profile compared to the active social media presence she used to keep before she ran into legal trouble. Authorities located Gomez in the quiet town of Tias after receiving a tip regarding her possible whereabouts. They believe she managed to blend in there due to her Spanish roots and her fluency in the language. Following her arrest, Gomez was detained, pending her extradition to Sweden, where she faces a potential 14-year prison sentence if convicted as charged. Number 29. Jorge Milla-Valdes. In 1987, Jorge Milla-Valdes escaped from a Puerto Rican prison and slipped into obscurity. He managed to fly under the radar for the next several decades while his whereabouts remained a mystery. Puerto Rican authorities believed that Milla-Valdes was living under the alias Luis Aguirre, but law enforcement failed to track him down until March of 2025, when he was arrested in Lee County, Florida, on a fugitive warrant. During his search for Milla-Valdes, the Lee County Sheriff's Office obtained his fingerprints from his records in Puerto Rico. They also acquired a set of prints from a criminal record under the Aguirre alias out of Monroe County, and the two sets quickly proved to be a match. 2 hours later, the agency's fugitive unit apprehended Milla-Valdes in Fort Myers Shores. In body cam footage of his arrest, the 63-year-old could be heard saying that Puerto Rican authorities had told him twice that they didn't want him back. Seemingly unconvinced by the claim, an arresting officer responded, "Now they do. They changed their mind." During the years he spent living as Luis Aguirre, Milla-Valdes was convicted of robbery and aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Records show that he's being detained on an out-of-state warrant pending his extradition to Puerto Rico. Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino praised the diligent and quick-thinking work of his deputies in a Facebook post stating, "Even if your crimes don't start here, I promise they will end here." Number 28. Yel Win. While investigating a report of someone screaming in a parking lot on the evening of Monday, April 8th, 2024, Philadelphia police found 22-year-old Mang Sang trapped beneath his own white Kia sedan with a bleeding stab wound to the throat. He was pronounced dead at the scene 7 minutes later, and a bloody 4-inch knife was found nearby. Surveillance footage uncovered by investigators showed a man knocking Sang to the ground during a fight, then running him over with the Kia and fleeing the scene in a different vehicle. Identified by law enforcement as 20-year-old Yel Win, the suspect turned himself into the authorities several days later, just hours after police released the security footage to the public in their attempts to identify the perpetrator. By the time Win surrendered, several people had already submitted tips identifying him as the man in the video. He was booked into custody on multiple charges, including murder, robbery, and abuse of a corpse. According to records, Win is currently being held at a pre-trial detention facility in Philadelphia, indicating that his case is likely ongoing. The circumstances leading up to the deadly altercation have yet to be revealed. Number 27. James Barkley. In early October of 2017, sheriff's deputies in Palm Beach County, Florida, received a call from a vehicle recovery company about a location hit on a stolen Audi in West Palm Beach. The vehicle had been taken from a dealership after the keys were left inside, and members of law enforcement wasted no time visiting the location that the tipster provided. The Audi sped off as deputies approached the scene, sparking a brief pursuit into a nearby parking lot. Later identified as 44-year-old James Barkley. The driver parked the car, ran behind the building, then returned to the car and removed some items from under the front seat. He then fled on foot for a second time, but he didn't get very far before a pursuing deputy threatened him with a taser. Barkley failed to comply with the deputy's order and was tased several times, but the device had no observable effect on him. He continued to run, but was soon tackled by a deputy who saw him reaching into his waistband during the takedown and punched him in the face. In addition to lacking a valid driver's license since 4 years prior to the chase, Barkley was in possession of keys belonging to 4 suspected stolen vehicles. He also had a warrant out for his arrest for an unrelated case and was arrested on suspicion of grand theft, resisting law enforcement without violence, eluding law enforcement, and driving with a suspended license. Records show that Barkley was found guilty as charged. He was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison with credit for roughly a year of time served and was released in December of 2020. Number 26. The murder of Jordan Allen Jr. 30-year-old Shapri Monique Stoneham of Houston, Texas managed to evade the authorities for more than a year after being involved in the shooting death of a young boy named Jordan Allen Jr. The victim was struck in the back of the head by a stray bullet while playing on the balcony of his father's apartment in March of 2020. He was taken off life support 3 days later after doctors concluded that there was nothing more they could do to try saving him. Investigators believe that Allen was the unfortunate victim of a drive-by shooting and that the bullet was intended for someone else. According to a witness, the shooting was Stoneham's idea and she acted as the getaway driver. The act of violence reportedly stemmed from a fight that had occurred at the apartment complex earlier that evening. At least one of the individuals involved was a friend of Allen's father, and the dark-colored sedan that was seen during the shooting is thought to be the same car that was involved in the earlier altercation. While investigating the case, law enforcement received evidence from a tipster indicating that Stoneham had implicated herself in the crime during a conversation. In April of 2021, authorities announced Stoneham's arrest on a felony murder charge. She remains in custody at the Harris County Jail, with bond set at $500,000 as she awaits her next court hearing, which is scheduled for July of 2025. In August of 2023, more than 2 years after Stoneham's arrest, police arrested a second suspect, 25-year-old Alexis Moshe Gore, on suspicion of murder. She's also being held on $500,000 bond and is due to appear in court in July of 2025. Shortly after Alexis Gore's arrest, authorities appealed to the public for help finding 34-year-old Jasmine Janae Gore, who has been named as a person of interest in the case but has not been charged with any crimes. It's unclear whether she's been located. Number 25. Ellis Matthews. Seeking a fresh start after being featured on a British reality show for supposedly squandering a multi-million-dollar fortune, Ellis Matthews left the UK for a new life in Southeast Asia in 2021. She spent some time in Cambodia helping less fortunate children before making her way over to Thailand, where she became TikTok famous for posting advice on how to live abroad while supposedly collecting British benefits for various mental illnesses. But Matthews didn't exactly get the clean break that she may have been hoping for. Her large social media presence and the nature of her content generated a lot of flack from trolls who succeeded in getting the single mother fired from her job as an English teacher and seemed intent on ruining her life. In March of 2025, the controversial 32-year-old influencer's friends became extremely worried for her well-being after learning that she was being detained at an immigration detention center for overstaying her visa. Notorious for its overcrowding, squalid conditions, and alleged human rights abuses, the facility has come under criticism in the past for the treatment of its prisoners. Matthews has been slated for deportation to Britain but is refusing orders to buy a plane ticket back to the country because she fears that social services will take her son away from her. During an interview with the Daily Mail, she claimed that the jail guards had served her rat meat and said she was refusing to eat until she was allowed to leave Thailand for a country other than Britain. She even said that she's willing to renounce her British citizenship if it means being able to go elsewhere, even though a UK official told the Daily Mail that they'd be happy to help Matthews leave Thailand if she were willing to return to the UK before going to another country. In a surprising turn, Matthews is now denying that she lived on taxpayer-funded benefits during her time outside Britain. She claims that her TikTok videos were created as a joke, but the situation is no longer a laughing matter to the detainee, who has described the jail she's being held in as a hell on earth. Number 24. Marcus McCargo. In January of 2025, Ohio State investigators arrested a 20-year-old fugitive named Marcus McCargo, who was wanted for the 2022 shooting death of 18-year-old Samuel Watt. McCargo and another man were nabbed after McCargo allegedly trespassed at a Cleveland deli with a loaded gun in his possession. He rammed his vehicle into an agent's car and tried to speed off when confronted by members of the Ohio Investigative Unit, but was successfully apprehended. While searching McCargo, agents found a gun equipped with a Glock switch, which is used for converting a semi-automatic firearm into a fully automatic weapon. He had been on the run from the authorities since being named as a suspect in the Watts murder case in August of 2023, and is the fifth person to be charged in connection with the killing. The other 4 defendants took plea deals and have already been sentenced to prison terms of no more than 10 years. McCargo is facing charges of aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, and felonious assault in the Watts case. He's also charged with various crimes relating to the Delhi incident, including felony gun-related counts. Following his arrest, he was booked into the Cuyahoga County Jail, where he remains in custody with bail set at $1 million. Number 23. Rasheed and Dean Boland. 20-year-old college student Justin Hackley was shot to death outside a smoke shop in Brooklyn's Flatbush neighborhood during a trip to the city in July of 2017. He was on a break from classes during his summer semester at Delaware State University and was visiting family during his time off. Hackley fell victim to gun violence while intervening in a dispute between his friend and brothers Rasheed and Dean Boland. The fight stemmed from a confrontation that had occurred earlier that day after Rasheed flirted with a woman on the street, upsetting her boyfriend. While Hackley's intentions were honorable, he paid for his decision to get involved in the altercation with his life. He was shot twice before his friend disarmed Dean Boland, and the 2 brothers fled the scene. In July of 2019, 2 years after Hackley's murder, Rasheed Boland was arrested in Lubbock, Texas on an outstanding warrant, charging him with second-degree murder and 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon. He was extradited to New York after insisting that the court hold a hearing to confirm that law enforcement had not arrested him in a case of mistaken identity. In January of 2025, more than 4 years after Rasheed's arrest and 7 years after Hackley's death, U.S. Marshals captured Dean Boland in Albany, New York. Both brothers' cases are ongoing. According to an update shortly after Dean's arrest, Rasheed is currently undergoing a court-ordered process to determine the state of his mental health and whether he's competent to proceed with his case. Number 22. Justin Smith. 21-year-old Diana Bryce was 4 months pregnant when she and her boyfriend, 23-year-old Justin Smith, vanished in March of 2021 after being last seen at a laundromat in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. Later that day, her car was found engulfed in flames along a Philadelphia street. A week after the young couple disappeared, Bryce was found dead in a debris pile in a wooded part of the city. She had been shot in the head multiple times. Following the discovery of Bryce's body, authorities named Smith as a person of interest in the case and appealed to the public for help locating him. He was still at large the following month when law enforcement arrested a 21-year-old woman named Tyler Garnett in connection with the case. In 2023, Garnett pleaded guilty to arson, abuse of corpse, and hindering apprehension for helping Smith dispose of Bryce's body and evade capture. She was sentenced to 11.5 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Smith's whereabouts remained a mystery until March of 2025, when he was arrested in Atlanta during a routine traffic stop for having an invalid registration. He identified himself as Prince Kareem, but was unable to confirm his identity and did not have a valid driver's license in his possession. Suspicious that he was lying about his name and birth date, officers decided to detain him, at which point Smith attempted to flee in his vehicle. He eventually abandoned the vehicle and was captured after a brief foot chase. Police identified Smith using his fingerprints and quickly discovered that he was wanted on a federal arrest warrant for unlawful flight. To avoid prosecution, he was booked into custody and is slated for extradition to Pennsylvania, where he faces murder and other charges in connection with Bryce's death. Number 21. Tariq Pinnick. 22-year-old Dylan Soma was just 2 months out of a recent prison sentence when he was fatally shot in Lockport Township, Illinois, in January of 2016. His death came just 2 years after he was arrested for murder in a case of mistaken identity, marking the end of what appeared to be a very unlucky streak toward the end of his life. Soma was accused of killing a teenager named Brianna Valle because he fled from law enforcement right after the victim was shot. He told police that he only ran because he had unrelated warrants out for his arrest at the time, and he was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing in the case. Shortly after Soma's arrest, authorities charged Valle's boyfriend, 25-year-old Eric Mayer, with her murder. He was found guilty and is serving a 122-year prison sentence. No suspects were named, and no immediate arrests were made following Soma's death. A year later, in January of 2017, law enforcement arrested the suspected killer, 20-year-old Tariq Pinnick, in Norcross, Georgia, while authorities remained largely quiet regarding the circumstances leading up to the murder. They revealed that they believed Soma was trying to purchase drugs when Pinnick killed him. Following his arrest, Pinnick was extradited to Illinois, where he spent nearly 5 years in pre-trial detention at the Will County Jail. In October 2021, he pleaded guilty to a reduced second-degree murder charge in exchange for a 17-year prison sentence with credit for time served and the requirement to serve only half his term behind bars. He became eligible for parole in 2024 and is slated to be released in September of 2025. Number 20. Brandon Gliha. In a gruesome cold case that baffled detectives for nearly 30 years, 41-year-old Stephen Edenfield was stabbed and beaten to death inside his Tampa, Florida home in February of 1997. He had been accompanied to his condo by a mystery man who had agreed to follow him back to the residence in the middle of the night. And although Edenfield lived in a gated community, the security guard who was on duty didn't get a close glimpse at the suspect or his vehicle. The killer slipped out of the community at around 2 o'clock in the morning, and Edenfield's lifeless body was found by his brother the following day. In a disturbing twist to an already brutal act of violence, the killer had written the word greed on the bedroom wall in blood. Edenfield's family longed for justice, but as the years passed, they became less and less confident that the killer would ever be caught. They were shocked to learn in early 2025 that someone had confessed to the crime seemingly out of nowhere. 47-year-old Brandon Gliha became a suspect after investigators reopened the case in 2022. Thanks to advancing technology, they were able to develop a DNA profile of Edenfield's killer. In 2024, the information turned up as a match to a DNA profile that had been collected in a 2005 assault case from out of state, ultimately leading to Gliha. During questioning, he admitted to killing Edenfield, telling police that he had traveled to Edenfield's home with a man known only by the nickname Chino on the night of the murder. Gliha claimed that he felt pressured into being intimate with Edenfield and complained to Chino about it, leading to a violent fight between Chino and Edenfield. He claimed that Chino had killed Edenfield and that he only struck the victim once in the back of the head with a statue. Based on the confession, investigators concluded that Gliha had taken part in the killing, even if his participation was minimal, and he was arrested for the crime. He's currently being held without bond at the Hillsborough County Jail on charges of first-degree murder and robbery with a deadly weapon, as well as an out-of-state fugitive warrant for an unrelated case. Number 19. David McMannis and Phillip Barr. 19-year-old Tara Sidorovich vanished from her Punta Gorda, Florida home in 2001 after David McMannis and his co-worker Phillip Barr went to the residence to repair a septic tank. 9 months later, her skeletal remains were found in a wooded part of Charlotte County by a man who had stopped to urinate along the side of the road. The case went cold, despite investigators' best efforts to solve it, and it stayed that way for more than a decade. In 2012, more than 11 years after Sidorovich was killed, authorities charged McMannis and Barr with her murder. 3 years later, in October of 2015, a jury found Barr guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in the state of Florida. A separate jury found McMannis guilty of the same charge in early 2017 after deliberating for less than an hour. Following a 3-week trial, he also received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Both convicted killers appealed their cases, and while Barr's conviction and sentence were upheld, McMannis had slightly better luck with his attempts to change the direction of his case. In 2024, a judge granted him an evidentiary hearing based on his argument that 2 key witnesses should have been called during his trial. It's unclear when the court plans to hold the hearing, which will determine whether the witnesses' testimony would be helpful to the case. Number 18. Amit Livingston. In 2005, 31-year-old Jamila Hernandez was found dead along the shore of South Padre Island in Texas with a gunshot wound to the back of the head. She had been killed by her lover, Amit Livingston, for trying to end their relationship. Livingston was found guilty of murder in 2007, and in an unusual move, the judge overseeing the case gave him 2 months to get his affairs in order before he turned himself in to begin his 23-year prison sentence. Perhaps not surprisingly, he was a no-show On the day he was supposed to report to prison, the fleeing felon's whereabouts remained a mystery for the next 7 years, until the spring of 2014, when Livingston was located in the Indian city of Hyderabad. His capture came after Indian authorities discovered that he was living under an alias and charged him with using a false identity. He was extradited to the United States and turned over to federal authorities, who transported him to Texas. According to prison records, Livingston will become eligible for parole in September of 2025, but could remain behind bars until 2037, which means that he'll be between the ages of 56 and 68 when he's released from prison. Number 17, Jon Miller. In a case that went cold for more than a half-century, 25-year-old Mary Schleiss was stabbed at least a dozen times by a mystery killer in 1974 while attempting to hitchhike from her home in Minneapolis to an art show in Chicago. Her body was found near a wooded intersection in rural Dunn County, Wisconsin, in February of that year. Tips poured in and law enforcement looked into each one, but every lead they received ran dry, leaving detectives at a loss for answers. Finally, in 2024, DNA found on a stocking cap near Mary's body led investigators to an 84-year-old suspect from Owatonna, Minnesota, named Jon K. Miller. Even after DNA technology advanced, however, detectives were faced with a curveball when it came to identifying the killer. They relied on a method called genetic genealogy, which traces suspects through the DNA of their family members. But Miller was adopted, which complicated the already complex process of narrowing down a most likely candidate. But with enough dedication, the task proved not to be impossible, and Miller confessed to the murder after being confronted with the evidence, telling investigators that he stabbed Mary to death when she rejected his advances. He also admitted that the stocking cap found at the scene belonged to him, and revealed that he had tried hiding the victim's body but was scared off by a passing car. Miller pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in March of 2025 and was ordered to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 16, Robert Waters. 19-year-old Kathy Swartz was beaten, strangled, and stabbed to death at her Three Rivers, Michigan home in December of 1988. Police ran fresh out of leads despite their best efforts to identify the killer, who managed to fly under the radar until after the case was reopened in 2022. Using genetic genealogy, a team of dedicated investigators narrowed the suspect pool down to 3 brothers. 2 of the men were quickly eliminated through DNA comparison. The third brother, 53-year-old Robert Waters, was a match. Waters was a friend of the victim's fiancée, but had never raised suspicions of his possible involvement in the crime. By the time he was identified as the prime suspect in the case, he had relocated from Michigan to Beaufort County, South Carolina, where he owned a successful plumbing business and was married with 2 adult children. Police would later say that Waters was calm and cooperative when he was taken into custody on an open murder charge, but he was found dead in his jail cell just days after his arrest, indicating that he was dealing with much more complex emotions than his demeanor showed while cleaning out his cell. Corrections officers found several religious pamphlets about forgiveness, suggesting that he had reflected upon his actions prior to his death. And while it was unfortunate that Waters was never truly brought to justice, his death was perceived as an admission of his guilt by St. Joseph County District Judge Jeffrey Middleton, who spent years working on the case as a prosecutor and had all but given up hope that the murder would ever be solved. Number 15, Anthony Scalici. In February of 2009, the NYPD received a call from a Queens resident about a disturbance at their neighbor's home. Upon arriving at the scene, officers found 64-year-old Rosario Prestigiacomo face down in a pool of blood inside his residence. His body was covered in at least 16 stab wounds along with multiple blunt force injuries. A male DNA profile was found at the scene, but it did not lead to the immediate identification of a suspect. In 2022, investigators partnered with a lab in an effort to identify Prestigiacomo's killer through forensic genetic genealogy. Detectives put together a family tree, leading to the identification of the victim's nephew, 41-year-old Anthony Scalici, as a suspect in the case. In their efforts to determine whether Scalici was a match to the DNA found at the crime scene, detectives traveled to Boynton Beach, Florida, where he had relocated at some point during the 15 years following his uncle's death. They conducted surveillance on Scalici until they saw him throw out a used fork, which enabled them to surreptitiously obtain his DNA. Scalici's DNA was a match to the killer's, and in May of 2024, Law enforcement arrested him on suspicion of second-degree murder. He was extradited to New York and is currently in custody at Rikers Island, pending the outcome of his case. Number 14. David Hollowell. An Indiana teenager experienced unimaginable terror in 2003 when a home intruder assaulted her at her Charlestown residence and shot her stepfather, who tried to stop the attack. Both victims survived but were unable to identify the assailant, and the case went cold in 2005 after 2 years of investigative efforts led nowhere. Nearly 20 years later, in 2022, authorities received a tip from someone who claimed that the attacker was one of 3 brothers that they were related to. After eliminating 2 of the brothers through DNA evidence, investigators tested the DNA of the remaining brother, David Hollowell, who was 53 years old at the time. It was a match, and in July of 2023, Hollowell was charged in connection with the case. Following the suspect's arrest, his defense attorney argued that the evidence wasn't strong enough to secure a conviction against his client. But he was wrong. And in October of 2024, a jury found Hollowell guilty of burglary and various other counts. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison and will remain behind bars until July of 2053. If Hollowell lives to see freedom again, he'll be well into his 80s at the time of his release. Number 13. Dana Shepard. 19-year-old Carmen Van Huss was found murdered inside her Indianapolis apartment in March of 1993 by her father, who went to check on her after she was a no-call, no-show at her job. Her body was unclothed and covered in puncture wounds, and the apartment was a mess, with a table overturned and clothing all over the floor. It was evident that a struggle had taken place, and suspicions of foul play were further heightened when police spoke with the neighbor, who said that he had overheard a loud fight for a half-hour straight during the early morning hours. Investigators interviewed dozens of people and followed up on hundreds of tips over the years, but they failed to identify any suspects in Carmen's murder. Law enforcement approached the case with renewed hope in 2013 after obtaining a usable DNA sample which was uploaded to CODIS, but there were no matches in the system, and the mystery endured. 5 years later, in 2018, detectives partnered with a DNA laboratory in hopes of solving the case through genetic genealogy. Another 5 years went by before they finally identified one of Carmen's former neighbors, Dana Shepard, as the suspect. Armed with a warrant for a DNA sample, investigators traveled to Missouri, where Shepard was living at the time. He was visibly shaking when law enforcement confronted him for a sample, and it wasn't long before the authorities deemed him a match and arrested him on suspicion of murder. As of late 2024, the 52-year-old accused killer was in custody in Missouri while awaiting extradition to Indiana. Number 12. Octaviano Juarez-Corro. Mexican-American fugitive Octaviano Juarez-Corro was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in 2021 after being on the run for a double murder in Wisconsin for 15 years. He was accused of killing Raimundo Munoz Silva and Julio Diaz Guillen and injuring 3 other victims during a shooting at Milwaukee's South Shore Park in late May of 2006. According to law enforcement, Juarez-Corro showed up at a Memorial Day picnic that he was not invited to and asked his estranged wife if he could see his daughter. When his wife said no, he lined up his victims, forced them to kneel, and proceeded to shoot them one by one. Following Juarez-Corro's placement on the most wanted list, the FBI offered a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to his capture. In February of 2022, after nearly 16 years on the run, he was arrested in the city of Zapopan, in Mexico's Jalisco state. Juarez-Corro was extradited to Wisconsin, where he spent the next 11 months before being found dead in his jail cell in January 2023. The 49-year-old was still awaiting trial for his charges when he passed away, and a jail employee was charged with misconduct for failing to check on him in a timely enough fashion to prevent his death. Number 11. Jason Cabello. In December 2024, investigators made a long-awaited arrest in the 2003 cold case homicide of 57-year-old Jeanette Wilton, whose unclothed body was found in Tamath Township, Michigan in February of 2003. She had been assaulted, severely beaten, and stabbed at least 15 times before being dumped into the Flint River. Just 12 hours prior to the discovery of Wilton's remains, witnesses had seen her welcoming a man into her home, leaving them under the impression that she knew him and felt safe near him. The man's identity remained a mystery for years before state investigators identified him through genetic genealogy as a Saginaw City employee named Jason Cabello, who was 26 years old and married to Wilton's niece at the time of the murder. News of Cabello's arrest shocked his co-workers, who described him as a pleasant person and an outstanding worker. He's facing charges of premeditated first-degree murder, felony, and more, and will face a potential life sentence in the event of a conviction. According to an update from February of 2025, Cabello has been ordered to undergo a competency evaluation. Number 10. Ronald Gordon Ackerman. At around 7 a.m. on March 8th, 1998, Toronto police were called to a parking lot where they found the murdered body of a pregnant 24-year-old escort named Donna Ogliff. The victim had been strangled to death just 5 weeks after moving to the city from British Columbia. No one knew who might have killed Ogliff, and for years investigators' efforts to solve the case brought them no closer to identifying a suspect. In 2022, detectives began using genetic genealogy in hopes of finally figuring out who had murdered the young woman. Their efforts finally paid off in 2025, more than 26 years after Ogliff was killed, resulting in the arrest of 50-year-old Gander, Newfoundland resident and oil field worker Ronald Gordon Ackerman. The accused killer was nabbed at Pearson International Airport after flying in from northern Alberta and is facing a first-degree murder charge in connection with the case. In addition to identifying Ackerman as a suspect based on genetic information, investigators were guided by tips from callers who shared information in response to the police department's Cold Case podcast. In a statement, a law enforcement spokesperson said that they're working to figure out what Ackerman has been up to in the quarter century since Ogliff's murder, in order to determine whether there are any victims that they do not yet know about. Number 9. Lawrence Diehl. 22-year-old Christopher Smith was stabbed to death at 2 a.m. on the Portage Bridge in Ottawa, Canada, in April of 1996. Investigators theorized that he had gotten into a random fight with a stranger after a Friday night out drinking. But the truth is that they really didn't know what led up to the murder or who was responsible for it, and they had little to go on in terms of figuring these things out. The case was still unsolved in 2020 when multiple law enforcement agencies began working together in an attempt to solve it using genetic genealogy. An arrest was finally made nearly 5 years later, in December of 2024, when authorities charged 73-year-old Lawrence Diehl with Smith's murder. While Diehl's alleged motive for killing Smith is unclear, police say that he called 911 from a payphone and reported the attack about a half hour after the deadly altercation. By then, it was too late to save Smith. In March of 2025, Diehl posted a $2 million bond and was released on house arrest. He's under extremely strict supervision, including GPS monitoring, and is banned from going more than 100 meters from his home for anything other than meeting with his lawyers and attending court hearings. In order to travel to Toronto to see his attorneys, he has to submit travel plans to the authorities ahead of time. Diehl is also required to pay $500 per month for his ankle monitor and was ordered to install a landline phone, which he's expected to answer whenever the police call to check in. Number 8. Jon Panaligan. 36-year-old real estate attorney Victor Jigar Patel was strangled to death in his Northbrook, Illinois law office in December of 2016. Police were quick to suspect a man named Jon Panaligan, who was being sued by a group of plaintiffs who were being represented by Patel. Investigators believe Panaligan lured Patel to his office by scheduling a consultation under an alias and wearing a disguise. They were in the process of obtaining and executing search warrants on his belongings and property when he went on the run. Authorities initially believed that Panaligan had fled to the Philippines because he holds citizenship there, but any efforts to find him in the country turned up empty-handed, and in 2020, the fleeing fugitive was placed on the U.S. Marshals 15 Most Wanted list. In October of 2024, Mexican authorities arrested Panaligan in the city of Tepic. He has since been extradited to the United States and is currently being held without bond at the Cook County Jail. Number 7. Richard J. Fox. In September 2021, a hiker found a human skull along a nature trail in Chautauqua County, New York. The very next day, someone else discovered a separate set of human remains in the same area. Investigators identified the decedents as 40-year-old Cassandra Watson, who disappeared in 2003, and 50-year-old Marquita Mull, who was reported missing by her family after the discovery of her body and before her remains were identified. In late 2024, authorities announced the arrest of a 61-year-old convicted predator named Richard J. Fox on 2 counts of second-degree murder. According to reports, he was in a relationship with Watson when she vanished. Mull and Fox did not know one another, but police believe that Mull willingly got into Fox's vehicle. Fox is currently being detained at the Erie County Holding Center as he awaits his next court date. In the meantime, prosecutors are remaining tight-lipped about the circumstances surrounding both murders, which have haunted the Western New York region for several years and counting. Number 6. Mark Munoz. In late January of 2025, prosecutors in Salt Lake County, Utah, charged 53-year-old Mark Anthony Munoz with the cold case murder of 33-year-old Jason Reuter, who was stabbed to death at his home in Magna in 2005. His girlfriend had left the residence at 11:30 p.m. and found Munoz unresponsive in the basement upon returning to the home at 1:30 in the morning. She later told police that she suspected something was wrong when she found the front door open because Reuter always kept it locked and never answered it in the first place. Law enforcement spoke with a passerby who said he had overheard 2 men arguing about money while walking past the house on the day of the killing, but the investigation quickly ground to a standstill. The killer left his DNA behind at the scene, but no matches turned up in the CODIS system until nearly 20 years later, resulting in the recent arrest of Munoz. He's facing a first-degree murder charge and remains held without bond at the Salt Lake County Jail. Authorities have yet to disclose an alleged motive for the crime and have revealed very few details about the murder, including how they believe the suspect and victim knew each other. Reuter's girlfriend had suspected Munoz of being involved because he had shown up at the residence with a gun on at least 1 prior occasion, but it's unclear whether he was questioned during the initial investigation into the case. Number 5. Jarrett Murray. In 2006, 21-year-old Joseph Michael Douglas was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head along an oil pipeline road in Rusk County, Texas. Police worked extremely hard to try getting to the bottom of the case, but they failed to identify a suspect until more than a decade later, when investigators finally tracked down a witness they had been looking for years. During their conversation with the witness, detectives learned that the person used some useful information but was too scared to come forward. In the initial aftermath of Douglas's murder, their knowledge helped to corroborate things that law enforcement said they already knew, and police soon learned that a suspect, Jarrett Reese Murray, had bragged to several people about killing Douglas. The victim's mother recalled Murray attending her son's memorial service. The 2 men were friends and former roommates, but something had clearly gone awry between them, although the events that led up to the killing are unclear. In January of 2019, Murray pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence. He'll become eligible for parole in 2027, and as long as he incurs no additional criminal charges, he'll remain incarcerated no later than August of 2037. Number 4. Rodger Zodas Brown. In March of 1979, 31-year-old secretary Catherine Donahue of Arlington, Virginia, was found brutally beaten to death in a Glenarden, Maryland parking lot. Decades passed before a suspect was finally identified through genetic genealogy, leading to the arrest of 82-year-old Rodger Zodas Brown in January of 2025. Brown was reportedly solemn and showed no emotion while being taken into custody at his Pinehurst, North Carolina home. He has no known connections to Donahue, which could perhaps help to explain why he managed to fly under the radar for so long. The octogenarian was booked into custody on suspicion of first-degree murder and other crimes and is reportedly awaiting extradition to Maryland. Number 3. Robert Charles Johnson. Robert Charles Johnson was serving a 10 to 15-year prison sentence in Colorado for second-degree murder when he escaped custody in 1975. He disappeared without a trace, and years went by with no sign of his whereabouts. After living on the lam for 32 years, Johnson was finally arrested in 2007. Investigators found him in Gardnerville, Nevada, where he was living under the alias Robert Neal Fargo and using a fraudulent social security number. Johnson initially denied his identity during his arrest. He continued to maintain his innocence after being booked into jail, but later admitted to being the wanted escapee. In court, Johnson claimed that he lived a largely law-abiding life during his 3+ decades on the run. His defense attorney argued that the defendant believed his life was being threatened by corrections employees and that it influenced his decision to escape from prison. Prosecutors challenged these claims, arguing that Johnson was not living a law-abiding lifestyle based on the fact that he was avoiding facing the law altogether. He was convicted of an escape charge in October of 2011 and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Today's topic was requested by the UP channel. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Joseph Andrew Jacquez. In February of 1989, someone entered a transitional living facility in Everett, Washington, and murdered a 33-year-old disabled woman named Mary Ann Daniels. The killer left DNA evidence behind at the scene, but DNA technology was in its infancy at the time. Police were unable to identify a suspect, but they never stopped trying to solve the case. In 2020, they submitted evidence to multiple DNA laboratories, one of which was able to develop a profile using a sample that had been left behind on the murder weapon. Using genetic genealogy, investigators matched the profile to a 61-year-old Clark County, Nevada resident named Joseph Andrew Jacquez, who lived next door to Daniels when she was killed. He had been interviewed by law enforcement shortly after the murder, but nothing he said raised any red flags to investigators, and he managed to avoid landing on the suspect list. According to news reports, Jacquez is currently in custody and will be extradited to Snohomish County, Washington, to face justice in the 36-year-old case. Number 1. Orville Pernell. 32-year-old Jamaican national Orville Pernell became a wanted fugitive in 2020 when he was named as the prime suspect in a murder in the Caribbean island nation of St. Lucia. He fled in the middle of his trial and went to Jamaica, where he was arrested in 2021. Pernell then escaped from custody in Jamaica and went to the United States, where he managed to evade detection for another year or so, before being arrested by Border Patrol near San Ysidro, California in December 2022. Somehow the fact that Pernell was a wanted murder suspect went unnoticed. He was paroled into the US and released from custody with a notice to appear in court at a later date. From there, Pernell made his way to the state of Georgia, where he was arrested in Clayton County in July of 2023 for having a stolen motorcycle, a stolen gun, and for evading arrest. Pernell was released once again, but his life of freedom in America ended in April of 2025, when he was apprehended on an international fugitive warrant. He's slated for deportation to St. Lucia, where he'll finally face trial on his outstanding murder charge. Thanks for watching. Hypothetically, if you had a child that would be thrown in jail for the rest of their life, but you were offered the chance to do the time for them, would you do it? And why or why not? Let us know in the comments section below.